What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. I'm recording this on Friday, November 21st, and we are about 15-ish games through the start of the 25-26 NBA season. So today I'm going to bring back one of my annual segments that I do called Sample Size Roulette, where I go through a number of statements and I say whether the sample size is big enough to conclude those things as true or not. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. So the first one I'm going to start out with here is the sample size big enough to say that the Hawks are actually a better team without Trae Young playing for them? And the reason I ask this is because Trae Young sprained his MCL. The news came out that he'd be reevaluated after 4 weeks. It has been about 3 weeks now, so I would expect him probably to be back sometime in early to mid-December, but obviously the timetable is a little bit uncertain just because reevaluated does not mean playing. It just means that they will, look and see what is realistic from that point on. So I probably would expect an update in the next week or so. But the reason this question is relevant is because they did not look very good when he was playing earlier in the year. In the first 4 games with Trae Young, they were 1-3, and they didn't look particularly competitive. They got blown out at home in the first game of the season against Toronto, had a minus 9.2 net rating in those 4 games. That was 25th in the league over that span. They were 24th in defense, 24th in offense, so really not executing on either side of the ball. And since he has gone down, Atlanta has really found a little bit of a rhythm here. They are 8-4 over their last 12, if you include the game that he got injured in and did not play the majority of the second half there. Though they have lost their last 2, but that means they did have an 8-2 stretch without him here. Over that span, they're 11th overall in net rating at a plus 5.8. They are 11th in defense. They are 10th in offense. So not really skipping a beat on the offensive end of the court without him, despite him sort of being the engine for this team offensively, and obviously much improved defensively. We know the limitations that Trae has had on that end of the court, and they have really not been able to be a above average defense throughout the Trae Young era. Even last year when Dyson Daniels finished second in Defensive Player of the Year, they still were a bottom half of the league defensive team. And that's even with allowing over the last 4 games, 122 points, 122 points, 120, and 135. So that just shows that they were really dominant before their last 4 games on the defensive end. They were top 5 over that span. And aside from the defensive end of the court, not having Trae Young play has really unlocked Jalen Johnson. They've sort of handed the keys over to him by necessity because they really don't have many other options offensively to initiate and run this offense and generate good looks. So on the year, he's averaging 22 points, 10 rebounds, 7 assists on 58% from the field, 40% from 3. And over his last 5 games, he is 26, 12, and 9 on 61% and 59% from deep. He just won Eastern Conference Player of the Week. And he is looking not only like a bona fide all-star, but a guy that could really push for an all-NBA team this season. I think the questions of who the best player on this team is are officially a real debate. You could almost argue that it's not a debate and that it might be Jalen Johnson, but he is such a versatile, do-it-all forward on both ends. He's a monster in transition, but the strides he's made as an outside shooter, as a half-court initiator, those assists getting up towards 7, 8, 9, like that's just really impressive stuff for a guy that's still only 23 years old and has continued to improve each season in the league. So that's been a big plus. I'm not saying that he wouldn't or couldn't have done this with Trae there, but obviously they have formally handed him the keys, if you will, without Trae just because they've kind of needed to. But aside from Jalen Johnson, Dyson Daniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker have been running the offense a lot more. Na is averaging a career high 19.7 points per game right now. Dyson Daniels averaging a career high 5.8 assists. So they've been running more offense through these guys. Neither of them natural point guards by any means, but obviously they can run the pick and roll a little bit. They can initiate that. Dyson Daniels, despite being 6'8", was advertised as sort of a point forward of sorts when he came into the league. So we know he's capable of that on the wing. And this is really the most opportunity we've seen from Alexander Walker, and he's, at least on the scoring front, been able to capitalize a good bit there. Porzingis has been banged up, but Okongwu has been really good in his absence. Kristaps has almost become sort of a luxury for this team. They don't necessarily need him just because of how good Okongwu has been, particularly stretching his 3-point range out, shooting 42% from deep this season, but averaging 16 and 7. He's one of the better rebounders for an undersized big in the league as well. And then the rest of the guys, Reece Shay's been a bit up and down, but has had some high moments. Kennard has been as advertised from beyond the arc at 45%. And then Vit Krejci and Mo Gay have just been awesome role players for this team. Krejci's shooting 47% from three. Mo Gay's been just great defensively. And so statistically, both as a team and pretty much individually for most of the players on the team, they've been a better team so far when Trae has not played. And a lot of that had to do just because Trae really was struggling out of the gate. He was averaging only 18 points, 8 assists, which not bad numbers, but this is a guy that's been a 25 and 10 guy for most of his career. And he shot only 37% from the field and 19% from deep. So those numbers obviously are just not going to get it done. But back to the original question of are they a better team without him? To me, this is still a resounding, overarching no. Because the sample was just so tiny. I mean, it was 4 games they played with Trae. I think it's just not fair to he's not going to shoot sub 20% from 3 on the year. He's not going to shoot sub 40% from the field on the year. And 8 assists is low for him. 18 points is low for him. They didn't get off to a good start. There's no denying that. But there was new pieces being integrated between Porzingis coming in, Alexander Walker, Kennard, and guys like Dyson Daniels did not shoot the ball well at all to start the season. Jalen Johnson has been better as of late. Again, I'm not going to say that that's because Trae's not playing, but I do think that the absence of him has started to catch up with them a little bit. They've lost 2 in a row now. They're 23rd in the league in terms of turnover percentage without him. And I just think Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Dyson Daniels are just have been in over their skis as full-time primary ball handlers and having to initiate this offense. It has been a very by committee approach, which I think that they have the personnel to be able to do that in spurts. But at the end of the day, when the games get more into the half court, you're going to need initiators and guys that can get shots for other people, that can get shots for themselves. Of course, Jalen Johnson can do some of that. But outside of him, I just don't really trust a lot of the other ball handlers or decision makers on the Hawks outside of Trae. And so, again, he has been the engine for this team offensively, and 2 things can be true at the same time. It can be true that they are better with Trae Young, while it is also true that maybe this was a little bit of a good thing that he got hurt, just because it allowed some of these other guys to get elevated reps in one tick up in the pecking order, particularly with Jalen Johnson, with Alexander Walker, with Dyson Daniels, with Okongwu being more involved offensively. All of those things are going to pay dividends for this team down the road. But I am not even close to being ready to say that they're better without Trae. I know his limitations defensively. I'm aware of his shortcomings as a player. Offensively, he can hold the ball a little bit too much. He's a little bit too ball dominant for what I think this team wants to be in their best version of themselves. He's not the most efficient player in terms of scoring or shooting, and he does turn the ball over a lot. All of those things are true, but he is a masterful playmaker, one of probably the 5 best guards in the league in terms of throwing lobs, just manipulating the defense, being able to draw fouls, all those sort of things, get others involved in their spots. And you need that to be a legitimate contender. Could they make the playoffs without Trae? Maybe. But to me, they'd be more a 6 to 8 seed that has no chance to win a playoff series. But with Trae, with the best version of what the Hawks can be, I think that they can not only be a team that flirts with the top 4 seed, but a team that can win a playoff round, and even in the right matchup, if they got some luck, find themselves potentially in the Eastern Conference Finals, depending on their draw. I'm not going to say that I expect that, but I can't rule that out with just what the East looks like this year. And I think this experience without Trae, hopefully, can sort of reframe what his role is. I think the best version of the Hawks is with Trae Young, but I think it's with him playing a little bit more off ball, shooting more spot up threes as opposed to pull up threes, pushing the ball a little bit more instead of pounding it so much in the half court, maybe a little less pick and roll and more motion offense and kind of by committee, share the ball, move it around a little bit more as opposed to him just running 50, 60, 70 plus pick and rolls per game, which he's one of the best at doing that. But having diversity on the offensive end is only going to be beneficial for this team as it is for all other teams. We've just seen these ball dominant guys not translate as well to a postseason setting, for example. And I think that just his buy-in to the system of what Quinn Snyder wants his team to be is going to be huge for them. So again, I am not even remotely close to saying the sample size is big enough for me to say that they're going to be better without Trae. I think they need Trae Young, or at least somebody with his elevated offensive skill set as a scorer, as a playmaker, beyond what they have on this roster, because I think it's a talented group without Trae, but it's a lot of guys that are more complementary offensive pieces. And if they can get the version of Jalen Johnson they'd be getting alongside Trae with his normal shooting numbers and statistical output on top of all the role guys they have, I think they can be a really good team. So when he comes back, reintegrating him will certainly be something to watch. But again, I think that the best version of this Hawks team includes Trae Young being a huge, huge part of it. Next up is the sample size big enough to say that the Dallas Mavericks should blow it up and trade away Anthony Davis this season? And of course, the reason I asked this is because the Mavericks have been nothing short of a disaster so far this season. They are 4-12 with a minus 6.2 net rating. That is 25th in the NBA. And their offense has been really as bad as you could have possibly imagined. I, coming into the season, had my doubts about Dallas, particularly on the offensive end. I said that I didn't think they had enough ball handling. They didn't have enough shooting. They had an imbalanced roster that lacked legitimate rotation level guards that can actually contribute positively. And all of that has come to fruition, but it's even worse than maybe I thought it was going to be, because I thought that they would struggle, but that Cooper Flag could do some of the ball handling, but they would probably want to have D'Angelo Russell a little bit more involved, which, if I'm saying that of all people, then it's really a necessity to have him out there, because I'm not the biggest D'Lo guy. But they are 30th, dead last in offensive rating. They're 27th in assists. They're 30th in turnovers. They're 30th in three-pointers made. So they're not shooting the ball well. They're not taking care of the ball. They are not, moving the ball and generating good looks. And overall, the offense has just been, again, as bad as humanly possible to start this season. And let's not look at this and say like, oh, well, people knew this was going to be the case. Like, no, they're significantly worse than what people thought. I mean, there were some legitimate people that covered the NBA that thought not only could they be pretty good, but that they'd easily make a playoff spot, that they were at worst a 7-8 seed in the play-in mix. And right now they look like the play-in is very, very far out of the realm of possibilities, to the point where they look like a bottom feeder. And of course, Anthony Davis has been hurt. Kyrie Irving is out, and reportedly he was supposed to come back at some point. I've maintained the position that I was skeptical that Kyrie was going to play at all this season, just because I thought they would get off to a slow start. I thought they might not be really into contention too much. And so at that point, why have him come back when you can just have him sit out the whole year and get healthy and then come back next year with just additional time to heal, recover, get back in game shape, etc. And one other thing that I have been preaching, but the Cooper Flag thing at point guard, I didn't understand this. I think that it is a disservice to him because he is such a special talent, and I'm very high on him as a player long term. I think he's going to be a multi-time all-star in this league, a highly impactful two-way guy. But he's 18 years old. He's the youngest player in the NBA right now. He doesn't turn 19 until January. So to ask him to run an NBA offense, which, by the way, again, this is not something he's ever done. He has never played point guard at any level of any part of his basketball career. He didn't do it in high school. He didn't do it at Duke. Like at Duke, he was predominantly an off-ball player, more of a point forward that could make some plays in the half court, but was not bringing the ball up. He was not running isolations. He was not running a bunch of pick and rolls at the top of the arc. Like, it just wasn't a big part of his game, but that's why he was so efficient, because he is that sort of complimentary off ball, but makes the right play whenever he gets the ball and can still score and do a little bit of everything. That's what makes him so good, is in that role. So when you try to shift his role, there's no wonder why he's been just a little underwhelming. I still think he's been pretty good, and he's going to continue to get better as the year goes along. but it was just an impossible ask and something they should not have had him do, and just poor roster construction. But for me, the answer to this question of whether they should blow up this team and trade Anthony Davis is a resounding yes. I think they absolutely should do this, because I don't think they were going to do it under Nico Harrison, because I think that he was just in too deep. He had to kind of double, triple, quadruple down on this roster and this iteration of this team working to justify the move to trade Luka Doncic, which was never going to be justifiable. But the past is the past. At that point, all you can do is try to move forward with the team you do have. But now that he is out of the picture and has been fired, I think that with the new regime, I think that they should have more of a leash to be able to shake things up a little bit. And so that, on top of the fact that they are 4-12 and they're in quite a big hole right now, just to be able to get into the play-in, they probably need to be around a 500 team, and they're 8 games below 500 right now. And I don't see them going on some, maybe they could start playing around a 500 team if players start to come back, AD comes back, and they shoot the ball a little bit better, Flag gets better as the year goes on. But I don't see a scenario where they're suddenly this 45-50 win pace team the rest of the way. And that's what they need to be around 500, because they're digging themselves a hole right now in the standings. Thankfully for them, there's a lot of other teams that are kind of similarly struggling. But the point is, to salvage this season, they'd have to go on quite a run. And I just don't think that they're that good even when they're fully healthy. And when I say fully healthy, I mean without Kyrie still, because I think he's still not going to be back for a while. But even when AD comes back and you've got Gafford and Lively and PJ Washington and Flag and Christie and D'Lo and all that, I just don't think this team is good enough. And even when Kyrie's back, there's still a team that's built around 2 second options, 2 extremely, extremely good second options in Kyrie and AD, but 2 second options. We haven't seen, there's no proof of concept. These guys are in their 30s. There's never been a version of an Anthony Davis or Kyrie Irving led team that was good enough to be a legitimate contender with them as the number 1 option. It just hasn't been the case. So they don't have enough shooting on the roster. They don't have enough ball handling on the roster. They don't have enough shot creation on the roster. It's an imbalanced roster, as I've mentioned, and they're basically forced to play Anthony Davis out of position because they have so many good centers with Lively and Gafford that if those guys want to play and you want Anthony Davis to play, then he's going to have to play the 4, but he should not be playing the 4. In the year 2025, Anthony Davis should almost exclusively be playing the center position. But the way they've built this roster, that just makes it difficult to have him in that spot, because then you're just not playing 2 of your best players for extended minutes. None of this is even to mention that Anthony Davis currently injured. And the irony of the whole thing is they trade Luka because of health stuff and conditioning, whatever. Anthony Davis has played 14 out of 49 possible games with the Mavericks to this point. Cooper Flag is a rookie, 15 games into his career, and he's played more games with the Mavericks than Anthony Davis has at this point. So when is Davis going to be back? I don't know. There were all these mixed reports about the calf injury, and they're worried about the Achilles if he came back too quickly. And I don't know. I don't trust him to stay healthy. I said this preseason that he's going to be good for 25 missed games most likely, but with how things are trending now, it might even be more than that. So how many games are you going to get out of Anthony Davis? Even if he comes back, can they be good enough to salvage this year? I just think the answer is no. And so I think that on top of the fact that they own their own first-round pick this year, and they do not control their first-round pick after this year until 2031. They owe out picks in 27, 28, 29, and 30. So if you are going to tank and try to get a high pick, this is the year to do it. They've already got Cooper Flag, who should be a cornerstone piece for the franchise moving forward. But if they can continue to be a bottom feeder, get another top 3 pick, get either Boozer, Darren Peterson, or AJ DeBonsa, I mean, even beyond those guys, but that's the big top 3 in this draft. If they get one of those guys, then the hard part of a rebuild is done. Like, I think all 3 of those guys are going to be really good in the NBA. Of course, I think positionally, Peterson or DeBonsa are probably better fits, because I think Boozer and Flag are kind of positionally redundant, which has been a problem for this team as is. But the point is that if they get Darren Peterson, for example, and they have Cooper Flag, that's 2 guys that are legitimate prospects that could turn into all NBA level players. And that's the hard part of rebuilds, is getting the guy that can be this next star. And they are in a position to potentially get 2 of those guys in back-to-back years. So to me, you have to try to make that happen this year, because the worst thing that could happen is you push hard to try to make the playoffs this year, end up as the 10 or 11 seed, and end up with the 11th pick in the draft. And it's a crapshoot at that point. You weren't a contender anyway. And that is just not where you want to be. And then they're probably going to have to move Anthony Davis and Kyrie down the line anyway. So why not rip the Band-Aid off now, tank your ass off this year, get another top 3, hopefully pick for them. And then you're in a phenomenal position moving forward in terms of your top 2 guys and who you're building the team around. Also, Anthony Davis is 33 years old. His health is, not going to get any better throughout his career. He's looked a little out of shape to start this year. And so I just don't know if his value is going to be higher than it is now. And I still think low-key it's not that high. I don't think they're going to get some 4 first-round picks, 2 swaps, and 2 young players. I think they probably could get either like 3 good first-round picks and some fillers, or 1 to 2 first-round picks and a good, promising young player. But at least that would allow them to, get more youth into the team. Hopefully rebalance the roster a little bit. They can lead guard heavy in the returns, but there's just too many reasons for them to blow this thing up. Between his trade value only going to go down, they dug themselves such a hole for this season anyway, and this is their last opportunity to get a top pick for 5 years, which if they don't do it, it could be really hard for them to build around Flag down the line when AD and Kyrie are either aged out or on another team at that point. So the sample size is big enough for this team to blow it up. Up next, is the sample size big enough to say that the Orlando Magic are closer to being a play-in team than they are to being an Eastern Conference contender? And I was incredibly high in the Magic coming into this year. I loved their offseason. I thought that I labeled them as sneaky finals contenders coming into the year. Obviously not my pick, not expected on that front, but a team that I would not have been totally shocked to see them go on an Indiana Pacers-esque run to the NBA Finals. But they got off to a little bit of a slow start this year. They're 9-7 now, but they started the year 1-4, losing 4 of their first 5, and looked kind of ugly on both ends doing so. They are 13th in the league right now in terms of net rating with plus 3.5, so not awful, but I think that is still clearly below where their expectations were. The offense, which had been a major issue for them over the last 3-4 years, over the last decade plus, it has not been super pretty. But this year has been a lot of the same. They're 19th in offense this year, but they, after being 27th last year, 22nd back in 2024. They are 24th in assists per game this year after being dead last, 30th last year. They're shooting, not great, 21st in three-point shooting at 34.6% after being dead last year. 27th in three-pointers made this year after being 29th last year. So incrementally better, a little bit better, but still not very good, And I think people thought that a lot of their additions would help a lot of these problems more than it has to this point. If you just look at specifically the Desmond Bane ad, I mean, he's got his lowest points per game since his rookie year. He's shooting only 32.9% from 3, which is the worst of his career, the lowest three-point volume since his rookie season. It's the first time he's had negative advanced stats or even below average efficiency in his entire career. So Bane just has not lived up to the costs that they gave out to get him and the fit that they thought he would be. And I think offensively, they still are a little bit too ISO heavy, a little too your turn, my turn. They're not moving the ball, not always having the best shot selection. And specifically, Paolo Banchero's felt a little stagnaty this year when I thought he could ascend into All-NBA level potentially. But I am not quite ready to say that the Magic are a play-in team, for example. I still think that they are a strong Eastern Conference playoff team. And I will not back down from my take that they are a contender in the Eastern Conference playoffs. Would I put them all the way at the level of Cleveland or New York? Probably not yet. But again, I think they're right there with any of the other teams in the East that could at least, if things broke their way with injuries or luck or just the way the bracket worked out, I still think there's a path for Orlando to not only make the conference finals, but flirt with making the finals, again, in their absolute best case scenario. And I talked preseason about why I like them so much, but the signs have started to show that they are making a turn here. I mean, they are 8-3 in their last 11 games after that 1-4 start. In that span, they have a plus 8.9 net rating, which is eighth in the NBA. They're 11th in offense. They're fourth in defense in that span. And after all the struggles and the clunkiness on both ends, they're only 2 games out of the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. And this is a wide open Eastern Conference in which, OG Anunoby's out for the Knicks. Brunson's been banged up. The Cavs have looked mortal, if you will, especially compared to what they looked like last year. And I think that they're due for a lot of positive regression also, because Desmond Bane is a career 41% shooter from three. And he's not going to shoot 33% for the whole year. He's just not going to. There's no reason. He's been one of the best shooters in the league since he got into the NBA, like legitimately like a top 3 to 4 shooter across the league at his volume and his efficiency. So he is going to make more shots. That is going to help their shooting and spacing tremendously throughout the year. You look at Paolo Banchero, he's shooting only 25% from three. Again, he's not a very good shooter, but he's 33% over the last 2 years. I don't think he's going to magically regress down 8% there. So he will make more shots. Tyus Jones has been completely unplayable, mostly because he's been a liability defensively, but he's not doing anything on offense either. For example, he's shooting 19% from three, and he shot 40% from three over the past 4 years. So again, there is some shooting regression that is just going to happen in a positive way. They're going to make more shots. Their defense has already started to uptick back to what its normal standard has been. They're fifth in the NBA in defensive rating. There's no reason they won't continue to be there. And one other thing just to call out is that when their starting five has actually been really good so far this year. Their lineup of Suggs, Bane, Franz, Paolo, and Wendell Carter is a plus 19.7 in 101 minutes this season. That is the best five-man lineup in the NBA with at least 75 minutes played. And offensively, which has been their downfall and the weakness for this team, they have 122.4 offensive rating with that five-man lineup. And so a lot of it has been the bench. It's been guys in and out of the lineup. Suggs missed some games here and there. Paolo has missed the last few games as well. But when those five guys have been on the court together, they've been a very, very good team on both ends of the court. And that is with them having poor shooting numbers that probably will regress positively. And the Franz and Paolo minutes have finally started to click a little bit. It's been an issue over the last few years that, like, not the best numbers of, like, Franz was better when Paolo was off the court and vice versa. And when they're both on, they were kind of bad. But this year, both of them are better when the other one's on the court compared to when they're out there alone. So that's an encouraging sign, seeing some chemistry there. Paolo's been shooting the ball a little bit less, so I think maybe that has some to do with it, that he's deferring a little bit more rather than ISO heavy in the mid-range, which we know, unfortunately, he can do a little bit too much of sometimes. But I still do have some concerns for them, even though I'm mostly speaking positively here. I mean, I think that they're kind of a point guard by committee type team, just because Tyus Jones has been so unplayable that sometimes it's Bane, sometimes it's Franz, sometimes it's Suggs, sometimes it's Paolo, which can be good. But I think that it's helpful to have sort of an adult that can settle down the offense a little bit consistently. And I don't know if they have that guy, but I think they've got enough playmaking to go around. But the assist numbers obviously haven't been there. So I do think they could benefit from adding somebody that can be more in that role, or just Tyus Jones reach a point where he's actually able to play because of how poor he's been. And then also the depth isn't great. Tyus, as I said, hasn't been playable. Jonathan Isaac is really no longer a rotation guy. So it's really De Silva, Batadze, Anthony Black, which, a lot of those guys are decent players, but they all kind of have the same limitations offensively. And so it doesn't really help their cause when they're out there. And they still just are going to be not a great shooting team across the board in general, because outside of Bane, Black's not a great shooter. Franz has not been a consistent shooter. Paolo's not been a great shooter. Batadze is a non-shooter. Wendell Carter's shooting it well, but historically is below league average. Like, they just have a lot of below average shooters across the board. But ultimately, I just think the East is too wide open between the Knicks and Cavs, kind of looking fine, but not spectacular. And I just think this team has too much talent. And there is so much time to turn this thing around. And they already have started to turn it around. Like I said, 8-3 with a +9 net rating in their last 11 games. If they continue at that pace, then there's no reason they can't get back into the conversation for winning 50+ games and being a top 3 or 4 seed in the Eastern Conference, which I still believe is where they will end up by the year's end. Up next is the sample size big enough to say that the Rockets roster is good enough as is, and they do not need to add a guard to this team, despite the injury to Fred VanVleet and a lot of discussion about this team not having a lead guard on the roster. And the reason I ask this is because not only have they been playing well, they are 10-3, but they have the number one ranked offense in the NBA right now. They have a 124.9 offensive rating. That is best in the league. And a lot of that has to do with the leap that Alperen Şengün appears to be taking. He's averaging 23, 10, and 7, shooting 49% from the field and 45% from deep. They are running a lot more offense through him. He just looks a little bit better at everything across the board, between his playmaking, his finishing inside, his three-point shooting, his just confidence on the offensive end. Obviously, having Kevin Durant helps out there for them, averaging 26 a game on 50% from the field, 38% from deep. Amen Thompson has had a little bit of uptick in scoring and ball handling as well, 17 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. And then a lot of their role guys have just shot the hell out of the ball. Josh Okogie and Tari Eason, particularly Okogie shooting 44% from three, Tari Eason shooting 51% from three. And then the big question mark for this team at the guard position has been Reed Sheppard. And it didn't look great early. You know, that first opening night game against OKC, he looked a little lost, out of place, like he just wasn't up to the baseline of talent and athleticism needed to compete in a game like that. But I think that's it was a little unfair because OKC is just so good defensively. But he has played much, much better recently. He's averaging 13, 3, and 3 on the season, shooting 49% from the field and 47% from three. So he has lived up to the shooting reputation that he had coming into the league out of college from Kentucky. And he just looks more confident. They're handing him the keys in stints. You know, he's not always closing games for them. He still isn't starting games all the time. And they're not fully handing the keys to him across the board. But they'll have these 3, 4, 5 minute stretches where they're letting everything kind of run through him. He's able to be more aggressive as a scorer and playmaker and shooter. And I think that that's been good for building up his confidence. But also, they just need somebody at that position to be able to do that because they don't have really any other playable, competent guards on the team unless you want to call Amen Thompson a guard, which I personally think he's more of a wing. Aaron Holiday is just kind of is what he is at this point. And then Okogie's been forced to play a little bit of guard as well, but he's more of a wing. So Sheppard has been the guy that's sort of we knew was going to be an X factor for them. Again, I don't know if he's quite at the level where he's ready to fully replicate what Fred VanVleet brought to this team, but he's at least been competent enough and good enough when he's gotten his moments to step in and be at least a spark plug guy that they can rely on out of the guard spot. But their offense is less about, you know, shot creation and shooting and whatnot. But they just have a very unique and clear identity and formula to this team. What they lack in their efficiency offensively, they make up for with volume of shots from crashing the glass and offensive rebounding. They are once again first in the NBA in offensive rebound percentage this year at 38.4%. They were first in the league last year, but they are 7% higher this year than they were even last year. They're on pace for the fourth highest offensive rebounding rate in NBA history. And context on that is a little misleading too, because the number historically has been a lot higher like decades ago. Like if you just look at like the top 20, 25 offensive rebound rates, there's not many of them are from the 2000s. A lot of them are from the 1990s, 80s, 70s, etc. And the highest of the 21st century is only 35.3%. So they're comfortably ahead of the best offensive rebound rate of this century. And so right now, you know, they're shooting 49% from the field as a team, but when they're rebounding it offensively at 38%, if you do the math on that, it basically means that they're scoring a basket on 61% of their shots, because the 50% of shots they do miss, they're getting 38% of those and then scoring that at about 50%. So they are just getting, from a volume perspective, more shots than their opponents on a great scale. And so that's allowing them to make up for any sort of other offensive shortcomings. But this was their formula last year too. But they're a little bit more consistent offensively in the half court too, between Kevin Durant being added to this team, between a better Alperen Şengün, between Reed Sheppard being a prominent part of this offense, Amen Thompson being a little bit more advanced as a driver and scorer going to the basket, and the role guys just shooting the ball better than they did last year. But to answer the question, do they no longer need to add a guard? Can we conclude that after their hot start on the offensive end? And to me, I think it depends your expectations for this team. I think that they could not add a guard, still win 50 plus games, still be a top 3 seed in the West, still win a round in the playoffs, and accomplish all that without adding anybody. But if we're talking about this team being a legit contender, a team that could beat Denver or Oklahoma City in a series, a team that could make the finals, then I still think they absolutely need to add a guard, because the expectations for this team should be that. They went out and added Kevin Durant, a 37-year-old Kevin Durant who doesn't have a ton of years left. Their window is now. And so if they win 50 games and make the second round and then lose, sure, it's one step further than they accomplished last year. But I don't think this is the type of team that's going to be satisfied with just getting one round further, because they expedited their timeline when they gave up Jalen Green and a top 10 draft pick for Kevin Durant. Like, their window is right now. And they may not have a better opportunity than right now, because Kevin Durant is probably going to start to lose a step. Are they going to be able to replicate what he brings with somebody else on the roster or an external ad? That is still a question that's up in the air. And so to me, expectations should be at least make the finals or bust. I think winning a championship is a tall task to ask for a team that, hasn't even made it out of the first round with their general core. But this should be a finals or bust team, in my opinion, when you look at the talent they have. And so if that's the standard you're holding the team to, then I think they still need to add somebody, even though the offense has been so good to this point, because I still do have concerns about the offense. I think that just like I said, Orlando is due for positive regression. I think that the Rockets are due for a little bit of negative regression, because on one front, they are first in the NBA in 3-point percentage right now, but they're 30th in attempts. So what they are lacking in volume from three, they're making up for in efficiency. But I don't think that first in the league 3-point percentage is sustainable, because they're 42% as a team right now, which if you look at just the talent across the roster and historically what these guys have shot, that is not in line with their career averages. I mean, especially Eason, Okogie, and Şengün. Eason, 36% from three for his career. He's shooting above 50% this season. Okogie's 30% for his career. He's shooting 44% this season. Şengün shooting 45%. He's 29% for his career. Thompson is still shooting 20% this season, and there's no real reason to think that number is going to bump up at all. So they have a lot of guys that are just making shots at a higher rate than they ever have in their career. And look, if they were 2 or 3% higher, then I'd say, sure, maybe they just got a little bit better. But you don't typically see these guys take a 10+% jump from deep from year to year, especially like a guy like Okogie, who's firmly in his late 20s. And he kind of is what he is at this point. He just hasn't been a very good shooter throughout his career. So I say all that to say I do not think the 3-point shooting is sustainable for a whole season, and they're taking the least amount in the league. So they are going to lose the 3-point battle most nights from a volume standpoint. Of course, what they can make up for in offensive rebounding is kind of canceled that out a little bit. But I just worry that if they regress, can that offensive rebounding rate be neutralized a little bit more, because teams are hitting way more threes than they are? And additionally, do we really think they're going to stay at that 38% number? Like last year, they were at 31%, which was still tops of the league, still, one of the best we've had over the last couple decades. And that number goes from 38 back down to that 31 number, and the 3-point shooting regresses. Like, there's a lot of ways that this offense could come back to earth a little bit. And of course, look, they could still be the number 7 ranked offense and still be a really good team, because they're a really good defensive team. But I'm just saying, from the standpoint of when we get to the playoffs, there's a lot more half-court offense, and matchups are a lot more important. Are they going to be able to get by playing these two big lineups? Are they going to be able to survive defensively with that? Are they going to have the reliable ball handling? Is Kevin Durant going to be able to sustain that increased workload on the offensive end? These are all questions that still will hold. And Reed Shepherd, again, with the best competition, he's looked a lot shakier. That's going to be a lot of what he's seeing in the postseason. Can he play 7 games against Oklahoma City at a high level? I'm not sure, even though I'm a big Reed Shepherd believer. But then last year, I mean, they were 13th in the league in offensive rating last year, so above league average. But then they fell to below league average come playoff time. So we saw last year it got a little bit worse when they got to the playoffs. I would expect it to be a little bit the same this time around. So if they want to get to that point where they're competing with Oklahoma City, competing with Denver, where they could beat one of those teams, if not both of them, to make the finals, I really think they need to add a guard still. And I'm not talking about like a Tyus Jones, Mike Conley type. I'm talking about a Derek White type. I think they need a difference maker, a guy that can not only replicate Fred VanVleet's output, but even surpass it potentially. They've got the assets to make it happen. We'll see if they decide to go that route. I think they always kind of wanted to see what they had first before they made a move, but I think that for the standard that they should hold themselves to, which is finals or bust, they do still need to add somebody despite the hot start, just because I think that they are due for a little bit of regression in a couple areas. And OKC and Denver are damn good. And again, it's going to be really hard for me to see this team beating both, but even just beating one of them, I think is going to be a really tall task because those two teams are just a lot more balanced across the board on both ends. Up next, is the sample size big enough to say that the Detroit Pistons are on the same level as the Knicks and the Cavs and should be viewed as co-favorites in the Eastern Conference? And this is a Pistons team that is currently 13-2. They have won 12 in a row. They have looked like the best team in the East to this point in the season. They have a plus 6.6 net rating, which is fifth in the NBA. They're 12th on offense, second on defense. And a lot of their guys have met or exceeded expectations so far this season. Cade Cunningham has been as advertised coming off of an All-NBA caliber season last year, 27 points a game, 10 assists, 5 rebounds. But probably the biggest reason for their ascension this year has been Jalen Duren, who has taken a massive leap this year, averaging 21 points, 12 rebounds, shooting 67% from the field. He's just been a monster finishing inside as a pick and roll partner with Cade. Defensively, he's made great strides as a rim protector and just being a little bit more engaged on that end of the court to the point where he's anchoring a number 2 defense in the league behind only Oklahoma City, obviously, who's just been ridiculous on that end. But he's making a real case for himself for an All-Star game this year. And I probably would have him in right now if the selections were made at this point in the season, because he just has been that good and this team has been that good where I feel like they would deserve 2 representatives and he would be the obvious choice. And he should legitimately be in the running for most improved player this year as well, just because of how efficient he's been, upping his volume, great rebounder, protecting the paint and all that. But his counterpart, little 1-2 punch with Isaiah Stewart, has also just been awesome for them. He's been a monster defensively. Having one of those guys down low for 48 minutes has just been a great formula for them. Stewart's averaging 2 blocks a game, but he's also hitting 39% of his threes. So we know the toughness he brings as well. One of the biggest questions for this team coming into the year was how would they replicate Malik Beasley's output last year, who was obviously really important to the team, but even Tim Hardaway Jr. to an extent as well. But Duncan Robinson has done about as good of a job as you could have hoped replacing Beasley. He's shooting 42% from deep on 7.3 attempts. So not quite the volume that Beasley had last year, but still very high volume, hitting at a really high clip. We know that shooting is kind of his thing. And so the question was, would he be able to fill that role? And I think he's done, again, about as good of a job as you could have hoped. We've got a Jeremy Lin-esque run to this point from Dennis Jenkins, who's averaged 28-4 on 50% and 44% from 3 over his last 5 games, who's fielding great while Cade was out. Kind of came out of nowhere. Not sure I even was familiar with him before this season, but hard to deny the impact he's had on the team and winning all the games that Cade has missed so far, just with him stepping into that role. All-Star Thompson, Ron Holland, both look improved across the board, both really good defensive players that bring toughness. Offensively, still, work to do on their part, but at least we've seen some strides from them on that end. And all of this is really with the team still not having been full strength. I mean, Tobias Harris has missed 9 games. Cade Cunningham has missed 3. All-Star has missed 4. And Jaden Ivey still has not played a game yet this season. And so going into this year, I talked about the 2 paths that a team ascending like the Pistons did last year can take. Some teams ascend in the way that the Pistons have this year, and other teams sort of regress a little bit. And it's more of a outlier that they made some jump into the postseason and they never really get back to that point. But they obviously look like they are falling into the former there and ascending, elevating to the next level as a contender in the postseason in the East. And so to the question, should they be looked at as co-favorites? Are they one of the very best teams in the Eastern Conference? And to me, I'm still not ready to go that far. I know 13-2 is compelling, but I just think that the track record and sample size of what we've seen out of Cleveland and New York over the past few years speaks for itself. I think those teams are more talented across the board. They've got more playoff experience. They are more proven. And I know they haven't looked, amazing so far this season, but they've still both been solid. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're probably prioritizing the postseason this year a little bit more than the regular season. The Cavs last year took the regular season very, very seriously, won 64 games, started the year 15-0. But we saw them flame out in the playoffs for the third year in a row. So I think this year they want to experiment a little bit more, make sure their guys are good to go come playoff time. So I wouldn't be surprised if they took a little bit of a step back from a win total perspective. And then same for New York. They have a new system, new coach. They're, still kind of getting the hang of everything with the personnel that they have within that system. And so I don't put any stock into, how those teams have looked to this point. They're going to be fine. They're going to be top 3 seed in the East. And so even though the Pistons have jumped up to this hot start, I still do have concerns aside from just the smaller sample size. The offensively, I feel like they don't quite have the firepower that some of the other teams in the East do. They're 28th in three-pointers made, 28th in three-pointers attempted. They do not have a lot of shooting on the roster outside of Duncan Robinson, and I don't know where that's coming from unless they make some outside addition. I don't really trust any of their ball handlers or perimeter scorers outside of Cade. Duran has been really good for them, but he is still a player that is firmly reliant on Cade Cunningham to get him the ball in his spots. He's not someone that you're dumping the ball down low to. He's not somebody that you're running an offense through that can initiate very much. So they're just so Cade reliant. And that scares me a little bit because that's not normally a good formula come postseason time to be so reliant on these heliocentric ball dominant guys. And then last year too, I know they were a little frisky against the Knicks in the first round, but offensively, all the things I'm saying now came to fruition. They were ugly offensively in the postseason last year. They had 109.7 offensive rating, which is well below both the regular season and postseason league average. They shot 32% from three. And not talked about that much, but Cade was not very good in the postseason. He put up volume numbers, but he was 5 of 28 from three. That's 18%. He averaged over 5 turnovers a game. He had 103 offensive rating, only 42.6% from the field. So he was about as inefficient as it comes for a guy at his volume, which again, small sample size, didn't have a lot of help. But that's kind of my point. He's not going to have a lot more help this year either. So he's going to just need to be way better than that if they want to win not only multiple playoff rounds, but even just one, because I don't know where that extra offensive reinforcements are coming from. And then even this year with Cade, it's like he's 44% from the field, only 27.5% from three. He's got a 53.5% true shooting. He had a 46-point game, but he shot 14 for 45 in that game. And he shot 50% or better in only 2 out of his 12 games. So for as good as he is, he's a stat stuffer. He's the engine that runs this offense, but they're going to come and go as he does because he's not a very efficient player and they just don't have guys around him that can supplement what he does. Another thing, they're 13-2, but they've had a little bit of luck. If you look at their expected win losses based on their net rating, they would be 10-5. So I'm sure we'll see a little bit of regression there. And like I said, I just think the Cavs and Knicks, I know what I'm getting more with those teams. I've seen the proof of concept on both ends of the court, and I trust it a little bit more. And I still will go as far to say that I still think I view the Magic. I think eventually they will be more of a formidable contender than the Pistons. I'm not saying they currently are, but I just think that they've got more talent. They have equally as impactful defensive players and system, but offensively, I just think they have more options. I know it's funny saying that about Magic because that has been their biggest weakness, but we've seen Paolo, for example, play better come postseason time. Bane has plenty of playoff experience and has been good in that setting as well. So I just feel like I know a little bit more what I'm getting out of those guys still than I do out of Detroit. And so again, I'm not poo-pooing Detroit's start or saying that they're not a good team. I still think that they're in a position to, be a top 4 team in the East, to be a 50-plus win team potentially. I think that they probably will win a playoff series. They easily could make a conference finals. It is wide open in the East. And I'll also say this, I think that my opinion on this could greatly change if they do pull the trigger on a big move. I know that there's been whispers of Lauri Markkanen being a team that could being a player that could make sense for them. If they were to add Markkanen in the Tobias Harris spot, and maybe they trade Ivy and that, who hasn't even played any but anyway, and then throw some picks in without giving up Duren or Thompson or any of the other impact guys on this team, then that completely changes the calculus here. Like at that point, then I think they probably are at that level with Cleveland and New York, and probably above Orlando at that point. But until they make a move to get somebody dynamic like that offensively, somebody who can shoot the ball, score 30 on any given night next to Cade, then I'm going to continue to be hesitant and a little bit skeptical, just because of the lack of support next to Cade. And I'm not a big believer in this heliocentric guys come postseason time if they don't have the right support around them. But again, East is bad. The East is bad. And could they make a conference finals run as currently constructed? I can't rule it out. I'm just saying that I think the odds of that are a little bit lower than probably most people would think, and especially given their record. Okay, up next is a sample size big enough to say that the Oklahoma City Thunder could break the wins record in the NBA this season and win greater than 73 games. And this team has looked almost unbeatable this season. They are 15-1. Their one loss, they lost by 2 points in a game that they led by 21 points at one point. They led for 41 of the 48 minutes. So they easily could be 16-0 right now. They have won their last 9 games by double digits. They have a plus 15.1 net rating, which would be the best ever, obviously early in the year. So I doubt that'll hold, but just to show you how good they've been. 6th best offensive rating, 1st best defensive rating at 104.1 by a mile. They are 6.5 points lower than the next team in defensive rating, which, to put into perspective, the gap between them and number 2 on defense is the same gap as number 2 to number 20. So they are running laps around the competition defensively. And even last year, when they were historically great on that end, they are 3.4 points lower than they were last season defensively, which it would have been hard to fathom them being better than they were last year on that end of the court. There's only been 12 teams in NBA history to start 15-1 or better, and they have the 3rd best net rating through those 16 games. Among those 12 teams, the only 2 teams ahead of them, the 73 win Golden State Warriors and the 97 Bulls, who won 69 games that year and won the NBA championship as well. And all of this is happening with a lot of injuries. Lou Dort has missed 6 games. Chet has missed 4. Aaron Wiggins has missed 7. Isaiah Joe's missed 5. Caruso's missed 5. Cason Wallace has missed 1. And Jalen Williams has still not played a game. A guy who was an all-star last year, an all-NBA player last year, an all-defensive player last year, a guy who averaged 24, 5, and 4 in the finals and dropped a 40-piece in a must-win game. So they're still going to have him come back at some point. All these guys have, been in and out of the lineup, and they just continue to not miss a beat. And they just are next man up all the time. With J-Dub out, Chet has taken sort of a mini leap offensively, 20 points per game, 8 rebounds on 60% shooting, 39% from 3. I think I saw somewhere that he's one of, if not the favorite right now, betting-wise, for Defensive Player of the Year as well. Cason Wallace looks a little bit more comfortable on offense and has taken another leap forward on defense. He's averaging 2.3 steals per game, which is up there with the league leaders behind Dyson Daniels, who we know is just the best in the league at that right now. Aaron Wiggins averaging career-high 15 points. Isaiah Joe averaging a career-high 14 points. A.J. Mitchell has come out of nowhere to average 16, 4, and 4, play 28-plus minutes a game. He's starting some games. He looks so comfortable that he could run an offense right now and be the best guard on some of the lesser teams in the NBA at this point in time. Like, it's just next man up, and they keep finding these guys that they insert into the rotation, and they just produce. I don't know if it's the system, the talent identification. It's probably a mix of all of that, but it is just ridiculous what they've been doing. And so the question is, can they break the single season wins record? It is 73 wins from the Warriors back in 2016 after it was previously 72 wins from the 96 Bulls. And I'm going to say probably not. I think the sample size is probably not big enough to say that they could do that. I think 70 wins is definitely on the table, though. I mean, they won 68 last year. They'd only need to win 2 more. But 74 to break it, or even 73, like it would just be incredibly hard. They would need to go 59-7 the rest of the way to reach 74 wins, which their best stretch last year that they had was 49-7, which is incredibly close. It's like insane to think like that they almost kind of replicated that last year, but they would still need to win an extra 10 games in a row on top of that, which is that's not nothing. That's pretty hard to do as is. And they also have the hardest remaining schedule in the NBA, so they have had a little bit of a lighter schedule. So that could have something to do with the fact that they have looked so unbeatable to this point. But look, just to get to 70, they need to finish 55-11. And again, they went 49-7 over a stretch last year. So if they just did that again and then went 6-4, they'd reach that 55-11. So I think 70 is on the table. I think it's better odds they win 70 than win less than 60 at this point. But I just think that 73, 74 number is really, really difficult to hit. But 70 is obviously attainable because we saw them get really close, but also they can just sustain any injury, and it doesn't seem to matter. Last year, Chet missed half the season. They still won 68. This year, J-Dub has not played a game. They're still 15-1. I think SGA is really the only guy that if you miss extended time that I think they would, skip a beat a little bit. But again, I think even if he missed 25 games or something, they'd still win 60. They're probably not going to hit 70 if he misses those games, but they've got enough. If once J-Dub is back, SGA goes down, then they're still going to waltz to 60 wins in the top of the Western Conference standings. So, but I just think that we need to see, like the Warriors 173, they started 24-0 to get there. And so this team they've got a long way to go for that to be a legitimate discussion, I think. But I can't rule out that we will have the discussion down the line, but I think 70 is more attainable rather than 73, 74, which I know only sounds like a few more wins, but there's a reason that number has only been hit a couple times, 70 plus, because it's really, really hard even for the best teams, and especially late in the season when they're probably going to be resting guys because they won't have much to play for. And after they've already won the championship, there's really no reason for them to sit here and try to prove that they can win X amount of games in the regular season when they should really just be focusing on getting to the postseason and trying to repeat. Up next, is the sample size big enough to say that the Los Angeles Clippers are not a playoff team? And they have gotten off to a putrid start to the season. They are 4-11. They have a minus 6.3 net rating, which is 24th in the NBA after being 5th in net rating last season. They are 22nd in offense this year after being 14th last year. And probably the biggest reason for their struggles this year is that they are 24th in defense after being 3rd last year. Of course, it does not help that Kawhi Leonard is hurt, but it's more about the fact that he's missed his last 9 games and the reporting on his return is wishy-washy at best. This is a recurring thing for Kawhi Leonard in his career where he gets hurt, and we're not really sure when he's going to be back. They don't really tell us. They're very secretive about it. So could he be back in the next couple games? Sure. Could he be back in 3 weeks? That wouldn't surprise me either. We've just seen it with him that when he gets hurt, there's so much ambiguity around when he could return to the team. And they badly, badly need him right now because they are struggling on both ends of the court. Bradley Beal, that experiment was nothing short of a disaster. I mean, he's out for the year now, which, to be honest with you, probably a good thing for them because he was shooting only 38% from the field. They were a minus 9.3 with him on the court. The team had a 128.5 defensive rating when he played, and when him and Harden were on the court together, they were at a 130.3. So those two playing together were just untenable defensively. And I think they're much better off having Chris Dunn in the starting lineup anyway. But now that is no longer a choice. So actually, I think that the Beal injury is probably good for them. But Harden's just having to do too much for them with Kawhi out, Beal out for the season now. He's got his highest points per game, field goal percentage, and usage rate since he was back in Houston back in 2020. So it has been a while since he's had this kind of load. And I just don't think that he's at the point in his career where you want him to be taking on that big of a load. But I'm not going to blame any of this on Harden. I think that he's really the only thing that is keeping this team from being like absolute bottom feeder because they don't have much else offensively, and nobody's playing really much defense on this team anyway. Doesn't help that Derrick Jones Jr. is going to be out for extended time. John Collins, good player, has decent shooting stats so far, but it feels like he doesn't really know where to fit in this group. He hasn't really developed the two-man game chemistry with Harden like we thought he would, and he's not really the best fit next to Zubats because he's basically forced into being a spot-up shooter, which he can do, but you want him to be able to play a little bit more at the rim as well, which when Zubats is in there, it's just clogged up, and he's not really able to do so. But the biggest thing for this team is last year their identity was defense. And they, from the very start of the season, they were better than we thought, more competitive than we thought, even without Kawhi, because defensively they competed every single night and they played hard. And we knew at the very least they were going to be a tough out, even against good teams. And none of that has been the case this year. I mean, they have just shown very little effort on that end of the court. They are one of the worst defensive teams in the league right now. And it could not have swung more in the other direction. And I don't know how or if they're going to be able to get back to that. But as of right now, they're going to have to do some real looking here and figuring out how they can get back to that. I don't think that the personnel is so different that they shouldn't be able to do some of that. But it is the oldest roster in the NBA. And this was one of the things I called out preseason that I was a little concerned about their ceiling for, is just because they got a lot of old dudes that can be injury prone. And we've already seen that a lot of that stuff happen between Beal out for the year, Kawhi getting hurt, and guys like Brook Lopez and Chris Paul just not looking like the version of themselves that we're used to seeing. But back to the question, is this sample size big enough to say that they will miss the playoffs altogether? I'm not ready to go there quite yet. I know it has been very, very ugly, but I still think there's a lot of talent on this team to be able to make a run to get back at least into the play-in discussion. And then once they're there, anything can happen. They certainly could make their way back into the playoffs. But just looking at the West, I mean, middle class to bottom tier teams in the West they're all a lot worse than we kind of thought they would be. So if you just look at the Mavs, the Kings, the Jazz, the Pelicans, the Grizzlies, who aren't going to have John Morant for a little bit now, like all they have to do to get in the play-in is to be better than those 5 teams, which on paper, in theory, they should be better than all of them. And it's not like they're playing catch up to any of those teams, because all those teams are equally struggling right now. So if they can just be better than those 5, then they're the 10th seed right there. That's before we even get into the discussion of Portland and Phoenix and stuff like that. So it would be quite a disaster if they didn't make the play-in, just given how bad the bottom of the West looks right now. And to be a top 8 seed, they would just have to be above Phoenix and Portland, like I mentioned too, who Portland's been a little inconsistent. Phoenix has played a lot better than we thought they would, but obviously not as talented as the Clippers. So I still think there's ample opportunity for them to be a playoff team. And Kawhi's only played 6 of their 15 games. They're 3-3 in those games. They're 1-8 when Kawhi hasn't played, which obviously is not a good record. But when he's played, they just win games. They're even just the last 2 years with Kawhi, they're 70-35 when he plays, which is this 667 win percentage, which is 55 win pace, and they're 31-28 when he doesn't. So that around 500 number without him obviously has not been the case this year. But the sample with Kawhi playing is still a really small sample, only 6 games. And again, they're 500 in those games. So if they can, I don't think that it's like an ankle sprain or something like that is a little bit more severe. So it doesn't seem like the kind of injury is going to hold him out for like months at a time. So as long as he's back by, end of this year, should have a good 3 months of him being able to be in the lineup. And again, they just win games when he plays. So I am not worried that they will turn things around, but the hole they've dug themselves in is obviously not great. But I think that they can overcome that because of the lack of performance by the other teams in the Western Conference. And it's not the first time we've seen them get off to some weird starts. I mean, last year they were 2-4 to start and then 6-7. They ended up finishing the season 18-3 and win 50 games. So they had that big hot stretch towards the end of the year. Then 2 years ago when they traded for Harden, they started 3-7. So pretty comparable to this year. I mean, a little bit worse this year, but it's not like crazy different. They end up having a 25-5 stretch after that bad start. They win 51 games. So that we've seen them go on these extremely hot runs, and the common denominator with all those is Kawhi Leonard playing for extended time. So once they get him back, I feel pretty good that they'll turn some of this around. And there's been a lot of discussion about OKC having their first round pick. I do not think they're going to be bad enough where that's actually going to turn into some top 3 pick or anything like that, because I honestly still would be shocked at this point if the Clippers didn't even make the play in unless they have some crazy injuries the rest of the way with Harden or Kawhi doesn't come back or something like that. But I just think they have too much talent and the West is too much of a just jumble down at the bottom that they should easily be able to make the play in. And at that point, they can sneak into the playoffs easily for sure. Up next is the sample size big enough to say that Joel Embiid is officially washed. And his stats this season are definitely down, 20 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 46% from the field, 32% from 3. He's only playing 23 minutes per game, so his per 36 stats aren't way off with his scoring and assists from what he was in his prime. But obviously, I mean, we're talking about a guy that was an MVP not that long ago. So for him to only be playing 23 minutes a game consistently is a big fall from grace. But it's more about the eye test because a lot of the things have just not looked great. He looks slower out there. His athleticism looks pretty shot. I mean, he barely has any lift when he's jumping on his jump shots or even just going to dunk the ball in the paint. And he is gravitating more and more towards being a perimeter player. He has shot a career low 28% of his shots at the rim this year. During his prime, he was right around 37% at that number. This year, he's shot the ball at the rim less frequently than guys like Draymond Green, Corey Kispert, Ben Shepherd. So that's not exactly good company to be in when you are a 7-foot center that has won an MVP like that before. He's shot a career low 19% of his shots in the short mid range, which is 4 to 14 feet, which we know has been an area that he's kind of dominated throughout his career. In his prime, that number was in 28, 29 range. So 10% less frequently shooting that shot in the short mid range. Meanwhile, he's shooting a career high 25% of his shots coming in the long mid range, which is 15 feet out to the 3-point line. And he's only hitting that at 35% right now, which is also a career low efficiency from there. So he's settling for longer jumpers in the mid range and making those at a lower clip than he has. And then he's also got a career high 29% of his shots coming from deep. He's never been higher than 20% any other year of his career. So he's taking more jump shots. He's taking longer jump shots. He is settling more. He's getting to the rim less. He's finishing less. So just not great stats to be trending in that direction when you're a guy of his size. And the eye test kind of matches that he's just not as effective getting to the basket and asserting his dominance there. He also is not rebounding at near the level that he has throughout his career, which not the biggest deal, but I think that's just correlated with the fact that he's not really in the paint as much. He's not trying as hard, boxing guys out. Like the effort and just physicality hasn't been there in the way that it was in the past. And he's posting the lowest career rebounds per 36 in his time in the league by a wide margin. His defense also is, I think that's maybe the biggest drop off for him. He was a very, very good rim protector and defender in his prime. He's still blocking shots now, but he's just a little bit more slow footed. Doesn't look like the anchor that he once was on that end. And that was part of, back when the Embiid versus Jokic thing was a real debate, which in retrospect was probably silly. But until we saw Jokic win it, one of the big arguments for Embiid in that case was that he's just a better defender and he protects the paint in a more efficient way than Jokic does. But I don't know if that's even the case anymore because he looks like a shell of himself there. And it is easy to forget just how good he was so not that long ago. I mean, last year was a total lost season for him, but 2023 he wins MVP. He was top 2 in MVP voting for 3 straight seasons. He had more points than minutes played in 2024, which only Wilt Chamberlain has done at any point in his career. He had a 4-year stretch of 32, 11, and 4 on 52% shooting, 36% from deep, 85% from the line. He still gets to the line more times per game than anybody in NBA history. And most importantly, the Sixers, they win games when he plays. He has a 65.3% win percentage in games that he plays throughout his career. That is 54 win pace. So this team's been really, really good whenever he's out there, and they have consistently won games. And they're winning some games this year. They're better than I think some people thought they'd be. They're certainly in the mix for the playoffs in the East. But is he washed? That is the question. And I think that it really depends what you mean by washed, because I think if you're saying, is he ever going to be this all NBA level guy that we've seen out of him again? Probably not, just because the sample size is big enough to say that I don't know if he's ever going to be able to play 30 minutes a game for 65 games in a season ever again. And if he can't do that, then he's just not going to be available enough or play enough minutes to be at that level of impact. But do I think he's washed to the point where he's no longer like a high level contributor? I will not go that far, because I do actually think he started to look a little bit better in the last couple games he had played. And I just think we need to reframe his role a little bit. It's not like he ever was playing 35 plus minutes a game at any point, but can they get 20 to 25 minutes out of him and just run the offense through him when he's out there, and give them 20-ish points per game in those 20-25 minutes, and continue to just manage his load so that he's fresh in the spurts that he does have and still looks good on both ends of the court? Then yeah, I think that he can be a very high level contributor for the Sixers, or wherever down the line he ends up playing, if it's not with Philadelphia. But with that contract, it's probably going to be Philadelphia. But he's shown enough. Like, again, he's still averaging 20 a game, and it's not like he's some empty stats guy when he's out there. Like, they're fully running things through him when he's on the court and when he plays. So I don't think he's fully washed to the point where I'm like, wow, Embiid just stinks now. Like, they're worse when he's on the court. I think people have said stuff like that. That he's going to mess up the stuff with Maxey and Edgecombe, which Edgecombe has fallen back to earth, which I think was probably expected after his hot start. But to me, that is just disingenuous. We're going to sit here and say that they're better with Andre Drummond or Adema Bona out there. Like, I'm not going to subscribe to that. I think the best version of the Sixers team still has Embiid playing as many minutes as he is able to, just because of what he brings offensively and the dynamicism that he has there. And defensively, he still can. Again, he's still a rim protector and deterrent. He's just not quite the anchor that he once was. But it's just in what capacity is he going to be impactful versus what he's been throughout his career. And I think that's the reframing we need to do. But I will say this. If he can't manage to play like just 5 games in a row, then it makes it really hard to be worth it to be in the Joel Embiid business, because he has not played 5 games in a row since the 2024 playoffs, which he was banged up during that also. But then you basically have to have 2 versions of your team. If he can't even play half the game, if he can only play half the games, then you've basically got these dual competing teams where you've got the with Embiid version and the without Embiid version. And it just makes it really hard to build continuity and chemistry that way. And you've got to basically have 2 different game plans, 2 different, sets of plays that you want to run. And it's not sustainable long term. So obviously this question has a lot to do with his health. I think when he's played, he still is good enough to be a contributing, impact winning player. But it becomes this balancing act of, is it worth the minutes that he does play when you basically got to reframe your team depending on any given night? So I won't say he's totally washed. He's not washed to the point where I'm like, wow, he's bad now, but he is nowhere near where he was. So he's certainly declined. But like, for example, like Chris Paul in his last year with Phoenix was declined, but he wasn't washed. And then this year, Chris Paul's washed. So that's my definition of it, is like, are you still contributing in a positive way? Then I wouldn't call you totally washed, unless you're like now suddenly like a baseline role player, then maybe. But Embiid's not that. He's still averaging 20 a game, and they're running the offense through him. So, okay. Is the sample size big enough to say that the Suns are actually a playoff contender? A team that people had very, very low expectations for. They were one of the laughingstocks of the league, expected to be bottom 5. This the controversy of the Ringer writing an article saying that they would maybe be the worst defensive team in the NBA, that sparked some discussion from Matt Ishbia clapping back. But they've actually looked kind of good, which is just not what I think anybody expected. They're 9-6. But they have the 9th best net rating in the NBA at plus 5.3. They're 5th in offense, 15th in defense. They have won 7 of their 9 games by double digits. And 3 of their losses include an overtime loss, a loss on a game winner in which they had the lead late in the fourth quarter, and
a blown 21-point lead in the fourth to Atlanta the other night. They led by 21 in the fourth quarter, so they really choked that game away. But if one or two of those games flip, they could be 10-5, 11-4 right now. Like, they've legitimately played really well, and they've been even better as of late. They started the year 1-4, but since October 30th, they are 8-2. They have the second best net rating in the entire league in that span at plus 12.6, which is like OKC level good from last year, which of course that's obviously not going to be sustainable, but it's just to put into perspective that over the last 10 games, they've been legitimately one of the best teams in the league. They're third in offense in that span, fifth in defense, which has been the big difference for them. And I think Jordan Ott has just been awesome for this team in his first year as head coach. A little bit of a lesser known name coming from Cleveland as an assistant last season, but he has stylistically shifted what they're doing a lot. I think defensively, they're being a lot more aggressive. They're picking up full court. They are second in the NBA in steals, only 0.1 per game behind OKC for first in the NBA. And they're just being really creative with how they attack opposing team stars. Like when they played the Spurs a couple weeks back, Wembenyama, they were just throwing doubles at him in spots he wasn't comfortable or used to having them. And it was his worst game of the season by a mile. I mean, he turned the ball over like crazy. He had a low scoring output, shot the ball really poorly, and it just made him look really uncomfortable. And the Spurs have been really good this year, and the Suns won that game by double digits and were up by, I think, close to 30 points at one point. So just being able to win with their defense is not something they were able to do last year. So Ott's done a great job of instilling that defensive intensity and mindset with this team. But then even on offense, he's really been empowering their role players just because this team really has been Devin Booker and a bunch of role players. Like they don't have Kevin Durant on the team anymore. Jalen Green has still only played one full game to this point. So it's been sort of a by committee approach next to Booker. But Grayson Allen averaging 19, 4, and 3. He's averaging 4 more field goal attempts per game than his previous career high, 3 more three-point attempts per game than his previous career high, shooting just under 9 per game and hitting at 45%. He's doing much more as a ball handler, as a creator than we've ever seen him do before, and he's kind of thriving doing it, which is not to be expected. Royce O'Neal also shooting career high in field goal attempts and three-point attempts, 7.5 attempts from three, shooting 43% from three. Both O'Neal and Allen are top 10 in the NBA in three-pointers made, which is something they didn't have last year. I mean, they shot the ball pretty well from three last year, but the volume wasn't quite as high as it is this year, and they're just getting consistent output and production from those guys. Dillon Brooks has 2 games so far with 32 or more points. Look, for better or for worse, they kind of need the leash to be long on Dillon Brooks. And so he's had some bad shot attempts, but he's actually played pretty well offensively, scoring in isolation and mid-range, having to do some creation. But like I said, they've kind of needed it because other than Booker, they just don't have a lot of guys that they know they can rely on there. And Brooks is at least somewhat capable, but he's been pretty good overall in that spot, averaging career high 20-plus points per game. Colin Gillespie, Jordan Goodwin, 2 guys that have just been rock solid off the bench that play hard defensively, have knocked down shots from outside. Gillespie's been a nice secondary creator for them as well. And Mark Williams has been awesome for them. I mean, the numbers don't jump off the screen with his scoring and rebounding averages. And I know there's been questions about him defensively throughout his career, but he has been impactful on that end of the court. They are a plus 13.3 with him on the court this year and only a plus 0.7 with him off. Their defensive rating is 10 points better with him on the court. They're a 108.2 when he's on versus a 118.2 when he's off. So say what you want about him and his defense. This team has been significantly better defensively when he's been on the court, and just him anchoring the paint and being that big body down low. He guards the perimeter pretty well for a big as well. It's made a big difference. And this team just genuinely playing harder, competing on both ends of the court, trying. They look like they like each other. The chemistry's good. All the things they didn't have last year, they appear to have this year. And it just feels like a big culture shift. I think Booker is more comfortable. He looks kind of more like his normal self. I mean, he's been good the past couple of years, don't get me wrong. But there was always something a little off where he's might be a little bit more passive because he, maybe just because he was playing with Durant, didn't know how to get Beal involved. The redundancies there, but he looks more alpha-y, if you will, which he kind of had lacked the last few years when he did have that previously in his career. He's averaging 28, 7, and 4 on 61% true shooting, just more consistently in rhythm this year, being more aggressive. He always is a guy that makes the right play, but being more involved and being aware that it's his team and that they need him. And so he just looks more comfortable across the board. But the question, is the sample size big enough to say that this team is a legitimate playoff contender? And I'm not going to say that quite yet. I do not see them being better than Oklahoma City, Denver, Houston, the Lakers, the Wolves, the Spurs, and probably the Warriors. So that's 7 teams right there that I think that it would be really tough for over an 82 game sample, this team to finish ahead of those teams in the standings. Maybe Golden State if they get some injuries. It's been a little clunky there, but probably not. So then that leaves one playoff spot. And as I just said with the Clippers, I still think they're probably going to find their way into the playoffs. So I still think the Clippers, outlook rest of season, even though the Suns have beaten them multiple times already and just have looked like the better team so far. I think down the line, they'll start to figure things out. I think Phoenix, one thing, they also have had one of the easiest schedules in the NBA to this point. Of course, not to take away from them because they have been beating teams by a lot. Like they've been blowing teams out, these bad teams. So that good teams take care of bad teams like that. So it's still a good sign that they're winning these games, obviously. But they've got a really tough schedule coming up. So we'll see where they stand after that. And Booker has not missed a game yet. They actually, weirdly enough, have had a better net rating with him off the court than on the court, but I think that is kind of random and circumstantial. I do not think they're a better team without him. And if he is to miss, a 5-game stretch, I think that's going to start to catch up to them. And I don't think they're going to win a lot of those games, especially against some of the better teams that they have not played yet. And outside of the 8 teams I mentioned, it's no guarantee they finish ahead of Portland, for example, who I still think is a really solid team. Memphis, I think, is still talented enough when full strength to turn things around a little bit. So it's not out of the question that they could fall back down to earth a little bit here. But I will say this. I mentioned this with the Clippers. There's a lot of teams in disarray in the West right now between Dallas, Memphis, New Orleans, Sacramento, the Clippers. I think Utah is probably going to fall back and tank by the end of the year. That's 6 teams that either don't want to win or are doing a very, very bad job at trying to win right now. And so all they have to do to get in the plan is finish above 5 of those teams. And right now it looks like they're better than all those teams outside of maybe the Clippers long-term this season. So to me, they seem like they're at least a play-in team, but maybe the 10 seed or something like that, which I still think is well above expectations for what anyone really had for them. I didn't see anyone pick them in the plan coming into the year. And we have to remember Jalen Green has only played 1 full game so far. He looked very good in his 1 game. Again, I'm not the biggest Jalen Green guy, but regardless of how you feel about him, he raises their ceiling, no question. He takes a lot of pressure off of Devin Booker. They don't have a lot of shot creation outside of Book. So overall, it's probably only going to be a positive once they get Green back. And, Brooks has missed 2 weeks of the year already. Grayson's missed the last 2 games and is still out right now. Mark Williams sits on back-to-back. So it's not exactly like they've been super healthy thus far, and they're doing all this even with those injuries and whatnot. And so I'm not ready to say that they're this playoff contender, probably going to make the playoffs or even likely at this point. But I do think that if we change the question to are they a play-in contender, then the sample is definitely big enough. I think we've seen enough to this point to say they're at least going to be in that discussion for the 9 seed. Probably, if I had to bet, more in the 10-11 range, but we'll see. But I think they're also a team that they don't have their picks, so they're going to be playing hard towards the end of the year. Some of these other teams might decide that maybe it's not worth it to try to make the play-in. So with Phoenix, they have the incentive to win. They look like a good team right now, and they're going to eventually get healthier down the line. So probably too soon to call them a playoff team, but a team that I think could be in the 9-10 range and, get to the play-in. Who knows? It's a lot can happen in a 1 or 2 game sample. And lastly, is the sample size big enough to say that Victor Wembanyama could win the MVP as soon as this season? And I asked that because he has just been ridiculously good in his 3rd season so far this season. Looks like he is a much better player than he's been in the first 2 years of his career. He's gotten better each year of his career to this point, averaging 26 points, 13 rebounds, 4 assists, 3.6 blocks per game, shooting 50% from the field, 35% from deep, 86% from the free throw line. His advanced stats are way up from where they've been. 117 offensive rating and 102 defensive rating versus last year was 109 offensive rating, 108 defensive rating, so better on both fronts there. He's on pace for 12.3 win shares over an 82 game sample versus being under 4 over the last 2 years. So he's 12 plus win shares is an MVP range territory to be in. The first game of this season this year, he was maybe one of the most absurd games we've had in a really long time. I'm not even really just talking stats. I mean, I think he had 40 and 15, which that's not necessarily crazy for him, but it was more the eye test. This guy was blocking a 7-footer Derek Lively's shot with his elbow, then getting the rebound, crossing guy up midcourt, hitting a step back 3 and 1 on the other end. Like, just the stuff this guy is doing, he's probably the biggest must watch in the league right now, because he might just do 3 or 4 things you've never seen a player do at his size in a game anytime you watch it. And so he has just been so good. And I think one of the biggest reasons why he's leveled up this season is because he's been less jump shot happy. I've talked about this the last couple of years, that he just needs to attack the basket more. He's so big and can move so well that he's at such an advantage finishing at the basket, but also getting to the basket. So I never loved when he would settle for jumpers. Of course, that's a nice part of your game to have, that you're able to make it from out there, but it shouldn't be the core focus point for a guy of his size. And so just comparing numbers from last year, for example, he's shooting 37% of his shots at the rim this year versus only 27% last year. So 10% more. 22% of shots in the short mid-range this year versus 17 last year. Again, that's 4 to 14 feet range. So taking closer mid-range shots this year than compared to last. Last year, he shot 44% of his shots from 3. This year, only 24%. There's absolutely no reason this guy should be taking almost 50% of his shots from 3 at his size. And now he's got that down below 25%. So that is a huge, huge thing right there of just why he's been more efficient. He's also shooting better from 3 than he was last year, I think, because he's probably taking better shots and not just chucking up that from super high volume from out there. And on top of just the offensive transformation and his shot profile there, the Spurs are a top 5 defense this year. And when healthy, he's the defensive player of the year favorite by a mile. And so they have not actually been that good defensively over the last few years, despite his impact there. But this year, it's starting to really show up in terms of overall team impact there. And so just there may not be a more impactful two-way guy in the league right now. Jokic is tremendous offensively, but sort of average on defense. Shea's a decent defender, but just nowhere near the impact that Wemby has had. But to answer this question, I think probably the sample size is not big enough to say that. One, because Wemby's currently hurt. They said he was going to be out for a couple weeks, so that obviously takes a big hit to this case. But even if he'd stayed fully healthy, my answer probably would have been he's good enough to do it, but I just don't think I see it happening this year, because I think the competition is just too steep right now. I mean, Jokic is averaging 29, 13, and 11 on 64% shooting and 40% from deep. Like, those numbers are just not even real numbers. It's absurd what he is doing and the production that he has, the efficiency that he plays with, his advanced stats. He's like basically broken advanced stats to the point where you kind of almost have to like take a step back and have a conversation about like if they're even accurately representing his game, because they're almost too good. Like, they paint him as like the best player of all time, which of course I think he's in the 10 to 15 range depending on how the rest of his career pans out. And I think his offensive peak is up there with really almost anyone in history. But his advanced stats, he's basically broken them to this point in his career. And then Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 32 points a game, 7 rebounds, 5 assists on 53%, 32 points per game, 7 assists, 5 rebounds on 53% from the field, 39% from 3, 90% from the line. He has just lived up to his MVP from last year, looks just as good this year, if not better, shooting it more efficiently from deep. And again, his team's 15-1. His team's 15-1. And both of those two teams, Denver and OKC, they're probably going to win 60-plus games. And so if you're putting up those kind of numbers on a team with 60-plus wins, it's just like, it's going to be really hard for a guy like Wemby, who's probably going to be on more of like a 50-win team to win it, unless he was just like way better from a statistical or impact standpoint from those guys. But the reality is he's not going to be, because even Wemby's absurd numbers and his defensive impact, like what those two other guys are doing, I just don't see a world where one of them doesn't win MVP this year. I don't know who it's going to be. I think it's still TBD. Probably I'd lean Jokic right now just with his numbers, and I think the Nuggets are going to be a top 2 seed in the West. And I think OKC, Shea might almost get like voter fatigue in the way that people will say, well, they're just so good around him that it might hurt some of his votes when you look at like the amount of talent that he has around him versus Jokic. It feels like he's more of the driving force for what makes him so good. So we'll see. But I have no doubt that Wemby is going to win one at one point. I really do think that in the next 5 years, he'll win an MVP. But I'm going to say no, that the sample size is not big enough to say that he could win it this year. But I think that has a lot to do with, one, the injury, and two, that these other two guys are just so ridiculously good that it's stiff competition. You'd have to be like a one of the best years of the last 15 years to even be in the running, which Wemby might be capable of, but I don't see it this year. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. Thank you so much for listening. We've got NBA Cup games tonight, so I'll probably have another episode out post-Thanksgiving, probably as we're getting into more of the in-season tournament and that starts to play out. But obviously, we'll continue to track trends across the league and hop back on as things start to pick up more. So thank you so much for listening, and I will chat with you soon.